Anyhow, I wrote this story in the middle of January from a prompt about hope. This was during the 31 stories in 31 days, or sorry, 31 days and 31 stories. Um, the image that went with the prompt was a lighthouse in the middle of stormy seas. Um, so that's kind of where I drew the inspiration for the story. And here we go. Hope. It was the one word I came back to every time I faced situations like this. Hope was the only thing that could possibly see us through to success or to survive, to live another day. Hope was what drove us forward. The situation today, though, was dire, and I wasn't sure hope would be enough. I'm the lone guardian of the water watchtower, a tower of light built to guide ships home through turbulent and clear weather both. The tower is built on a rocky island some kilometers offshore and had a light that reflected off of the mirrors around it and pierced through even the densest fog, the most sheeting rain, and the most blanketing snow. And here in the north, we got them all. Sometimes in the span of one day, we got them all. The tower stood some 15 meters above the island, and while the island lay low in the ocean, it remained stalwart for hundreds of years. I was the fifth such guardian to inhabit the watchtower, and I expected it would stand easily for 5 more, other than the need for hope. Because each time we needed hope, I felt the tower's resoluteness waver. And maybe, just maybe, it would falter one of these days. I hoped it wasn't while I was here, or even any of my descendants. But such is hope. It can only do so much. The storm coming at me was a violent one. I'd seen the storm clouds in the distance for weeks. It was slow moving, destructive, and ready for vengeance against the tower. Birds fled from it, whales and fish swam away. Now, between the tower and the storm, there was only open ocean, and it seemed determined to throw the whole of the ocean at me, in addition to the precipitation. All I could do was let it come. Uh, all I could do was let it come, though. The waves crested 5 meters easily, well above the shoreline, well above the door to the tower. I expected the bottom floor to be completely flooded. I expected my boat that I used to go to the mainland would be rent to pieces. I expected the small dock where the boat was tied up would be torn from the island and sent plummeting to the depths before long as well. The rocks, however, those would stay. No matter how powerful the storm, the rocks always stayed. They were moored to the island with some ancient strength of dirt and stone that simply could not dislodge them, or at least had never been dislodged before. Lightning streaked the sky, wind whipped the air around, rain started falling, and snow and ice. The temperature was right at that perfect spot where you could get anything, and the storm would show you just how strong and masterful it was by giving it all to you. However, despite the horrible weather, this was just the edge. I could still see hope in the form of clear skies behind me. I could see some glimmer of hope in the sky, a sun that wouldn't perish. Maybe the storm would blow past, and I would be looking at the sun again soon. Maybe not. That remained to be seen. Waves crashed against the rocks on the island, threatened to break the rocks in two, but the rocks refused to break and told the waves to break instead. And they did. One after another broken upon the shore, and while water leaped onto the shore, it would recede in time. This was why I wasn't too concerned about flooding on the ground floor. It had flooded before, it would flood again in the future. I didn't store anything down there, so if it flooded, nothing would be lost. The loss of my boat was a bigger concern that I didn't have an immediate fix for. Lightning streaked across the sky again, arcing from one spot to the next and not coming down to the ocean so far as I could tell. Was it scared of the ocean? I wondered. The storm was still just the edge for me. It was so slow moving I wouldn't be surprised if I could run across clear land faster than it. Still, better to be inside a stalwart tower, I hoped. I wondered if maybe I should have taken the boat to shore before the seas got so rough. It was too late for that by days now. The seas had turned inhospitable over a week ago. Had it really been that long? Stormy seas on clear days were dangerous to all in the ocean. I probably would have foundered in that tiny boat had I even tried to get back. No, it was safer to stay. Safer for me. Safer for any captain who tried to find their way through this godforsaken storm. I doubted anyone would be at sea that could be saved, but if I could give them a glimmer of hope, well, that would be something. And if they survived to the mainland, well, that would be worth all the hope in the world. Storms like this caused me all kinds of worry that there was foul play at hand. How could a storm be this severe and so slow moving, if not by the hand of some sinister force? But then, what sinister force could command the weather at all? None that I had ever seen firsthand. The possibility was out there, though. Possibility that something else was at work here that I just didn't understand, that I couldn't comprehend. Another arc of lightning, and another, followed very quickly with such thunderous booms that I had never heard before. The storm was very nearly upon me. All the windows were boarded up and all the loose things secured. Even the light at the top of the tower was sheltered behind its protective shell. It could withstand a lot, but it was not impenetrable. Even though nothing had ever damaged or destroyed it before, I had visions of it being destroyed that littered my dreams. I also had seen the destruction of the tower in my dreams. I hoped they would not come true. The storm clouds came over the tower like a swarm of insects that blotted out the sky in slow motion. The clouds roiled and burned, flashed and resonated around me. They were low as well, which made them all the more looming, all the more terrible. In the flashes of lightning, I could see movement in the clouds, though whether there were things in the sky or if it was just a trick of the light, I could not say for sure. Still, the storm felt all the world of evil, and I hoped I could just see my way to the other side of it. But the only way to the other side was through, and the only way through was to stay put and let it wash over the tower, over the island, and over the ocean that threatened to destroy anything in its path. The waves were cresting 6, maybe 7 meters now, fully up over the bottom floor of the tower, and each time they struck the land, it made the whole tower shake and shiver. I put my hands on the stone of the tower to lend it what moral support I could. Not that it would actually help or matter in the end, but the things that protect us deserve our support in turn. It was the only thing I could actually do. Nothing could stop this apocalypse. I can only watch as it came. More flashes in the sky, more phantasms flying by. Witches? That seemed too far-fetched, but that was the image in my head. Stories from my childhood of people hunting and eating other people, weaving magic in unnatural ways. Stories all, and inaccurate to the extreme. I knew plenty of witches, and none of them once tried to eat another person. Also, their magic was largely not so potent. Certainly not so potent as the storm. Still, that was the image in my head. Sinister beings hidden among the clouds, flying through it. How could anything fly through in such terribly powerful winds and rain, through the lightning, defied any realm of logic I could find in my soul? No, they were just phantasms, just imaginations trying to make a real storm into some fantastic otherworldly creation. Another flash of lightning, a crash of thunder, the buffeting of winds, the punches of waves shook my whole world. Was that a crack? I thought I heard something beyond all of it, but it was impossible to hear anything but the storm. Still, I thought I heard it, and so I moved from my spot, inspecting every inch of the tower that I could safely do. As I moved from the top floor sanctuary, though, I could feel the difference. The boards on the second floor were torn away, the windows broken, and now wind and rain and snow whipped into the second floor, and waves plummeted in as if they came from the sky itself. The second floor was lost. It was where most of my provisions were. Not all, but most. I would have only a few days to live out the storm, and if it didn't take me, well then maybe lack of food or lack of water would. It would be a horrible way for it all to end after all this time. Why didn't I go to shore? I returned to the sanctuary, closed and boarded the door shut. I returned to my chair, an ancient thing that had been here since the first days of the tower's opening. It was well used but sturdy, comfortable. Having had the stuffing replaced every few years was a luxury I could justify well since I spent so much time in it. It gave me a view all around from the tower top and allowed me to control the tower's light with very little effort. There was a huge boon, for there or plenty of times when effort from storms around the tower made everything more difficult. I remembered a storm from my youth where there were a dozen ships in my view stuck and floundering out there, and a 13th out there trying their best to rescue those they could. It was a lost cause, and I could see all of it unfold from the top of the tower, unable to affect the outcome at all. Still, it was a difficult day, and controlling the light was of the most importance. I had not been there to Had I not been there to direct the people trying to save the others, surely they would have all been lost. Unfortunately, even with my help, so many perished that day. That was a fast storm, terrible in power and ruthless in strength, and it tore apart 8 of the ships in no time and sank 2 others. 40 people were saved, hundreds lost. But for my work, all of them would have died, including the 20 on the boat out there trying to save the others. A crash against the tower directly shook me out of my reminiscing. The tower could take the waves, was constructed to let the waves splash over her like any of the rocks below, break up the wave, send it crying back into the ocean. But these waves were strong. I could feel it as each pounding wave struck. As each time they struck, I could foresee the destruction of the tower take place in my mind's eye. The precipitation eddied, and the wind even lessened some. The waves receded, but above me in the clouds, the storm still raged. It was holding its strength, building up to hit the island with a force stronger yet, I figured. Some would call it the eye of the storm. It was far from calm, certainly didn't feel any better because it was a constant threat of what was yet to come, what was left to befall the tower, the island, the rocks, and me. I rested in that span where the storm was resting. If it would build up its strength, then so would I. The thunder and lightning was still close, but not right on top of me, was at least distant enough that the stone of the tower muffled them a little. I came to some time later. I wasn't sure if it was day or night. It had been dark for so long already, and I could see no sign of lightness anywhere, in any direction. This was the part of the storm that took all hope from everything and left only despair. The storm had started up again in force, crashing and thrashing, rending everything in sight. For all of the endurance of the tower and of the island it rested on, I wondered how the storm would destroy all of the mainland with its force. The buildings others lived in were not so stalwart, and the other structures were rarely so strong that they could withstand forces like this, and certainly not for long. The only thing they had going was the storm would likely lose strength over the land. The coastal communities were probably in for a rough night ahead, if it was night. I still didn't have a good sense of time. Time didn't really matter. More crashing waves hit the tower, shaking it to the bones, to my bones. Again, I put my hand on the wall, willing it to take the hits, but to stay put. Never had I felt so powerless as this. But when it is all you have left, then it is what you do, both to make the time pass and to feel like you are more than an ant in this vast world. Hope was gone by then. Despair was overtaking everything. I barely had a second's reprieve between thunder, and the flashes of lightning were so constant it might have been coming from all around me. Indeed, I could see nearly all the way to the horizon for how constant the brightness from the lightning was. Still, it was an illusion like the witches. I could see no further than my arm had I been out there in it, and to this point I was inside, and as safe as I could be, I hoped. More crashing, more shaking, another crack, was it? What was left to break except for the tower itself, I wondered. I could not afford to investigate, though. Leaving my sanctuary would expose me to whatever was happening on the second floor, and it was already lost. And since it was already lost, I might as well stay put, might as well keep myself as safe as possible. The wind buffeted the tower anew, shaking it in ways that the waves could not, and for a brief moment I thought the whole top of the tower would fly off, disconnected, and take me away. Into the ocean, no doubt, but away nonetheless. Still, it didn't, and it was just another fancy of my mind as it tried to understand the chaos of the storm. Off in the distance, nearly at the edge of the horizon, I could see. I swore I could see a bit of a lighter colored cloud. It was too far off to be sure, but it was just the last glimmer of hope for me, the last potential of getting through this, surviving. I poured myself a glass of water. It was the first time I had had since the start of the storm. It was a superstition of mine to not drink until I saw the storm's farthest edge, and I had finally reached that point. It was still far off, but at least I could see it coming. On and on the storm raged. Another crash and a terrible shake of the tower. I hoped it would survive these last few hours. It would be a shame to falter when salvation was just in sight, just nearly close enough to grasp. As a concept, it was still kilometers away for sure. I drank down the water in one gasp. I was parched. I had been holding my breath for as long as I could, each breath, like I wouldn't get another breath if I tried, so I better hold on to it. But that was silly. The air was still there, so was the water. Waiting did nothing but make me suffer for it. But it was what I did, even if it didn't make sense. The edge of the storm was clear now, and beyond it I could see it was past dawn. The sun shone underneath the clouds as it started to rise in the east. It was glorious to perceive and gave a weird light to the storm where it was impossibly dark due to the clouds, but the rain and snow and the wind, I dare say, were lit up by the sun and made everything shimmer and shine. Even the coating of ice blanketing the exterior shone brightly, if only for a few minutes. Then the sun was above the line of the storm clouds, and I was again in darkness. But the light was out there, if far away. I could wait out the rest of the storm. Hope could get me there. I was certain of it. Another crash. How many was that? 10? 40? 100? I had lost count. I just knew it was a lot. I could hear water sloshing around, probably on the floor below. How much would be left? Would there even be a floor for me to descend to? I didn't know. It might have been hours before the storm finally passed, but it still felt like days. When it did pass, the storm gave one final push at the tower, and I thought for sure it would collapse. Somehow, however, it did not. The sun broke through the storm clouds triumphantly, saying, "Here I am," with such brightness. I could almost forget that it was not so powerful as to drive away the storm faster. It was well past the noon hour, though, so it had been hours. I looked out at the seas, and they would be stormy for days still, but maybe passable once the storm moved on. Passable to those with a boat, and I was almost certainly without one now. I stayed in that room for some time longer, not wanting to see the destruction of the bottom floors until I was ready to deal with it. I drank another glass of water, ate some salted fish, sat in my chair, listened as the lingering wind blew through the holes and sent eerie echoes through the whole of the tower. Whatever the destruction below, the sanctuary had persevered, and within it so did I. I could have hoped for more, but that would have been some kind of hubris. I was thankful to have survived, and the rest, well, the rest could be rebuilt and left for history to remember. Someone should remember anyway.